Hi, I think it's important to say that any report that the ACMD does will do a diversity impact assessment that looks to see whether or not the recommendations that were being made, or indeed the substance that we're looking at, has a differential negative impact on any particular segment of society. And that's something that the Council regularly and routinely does. And I think it'll be the same for this report as it will the polysubstance report and the cocaine report, and indeed the recovery committee.
Yes, well, we thank the questioner for the question. You'll have heard that we are doing something about this. We're revitalising a CAT review, and please contact Hugh or our secretary. We would like to take evidence from people such as yourself.
Hello, I'm Marion Stewart from the Angelus Foundation. First of all, I think congratulations are due, because I think the report is excellent, and there are lots of things in there that we've been campaigning for the last couple of years. One of the things that we did campaign for initially was to put banning orders in place, and we did succeed, but I've come to realise that banning is really probably not the way to travel in the long term. If you look at what happened with methadone, particularly 6 months after the ban, the research showed that 2/3 of kids were still taking it, and it had doubled in price. And so I feel that a lot of resources could be spent on banning orders, but I think that it's even more important that resources are spent on raising awareness, as you point out in the report, and education and family therapy. Now, in our group, we have some professors and doctors who've actually pioneered peer-reviewed research, which shows that if you implement certain education programs in schools, you can reduce the use of drugs, alcohol and legal highs by 50 to 80%. And for family therapy, it's 50% within 1 year, which costs £2,000 per family. We've been asking the government to at least give direction from central government to the regions, if not to get behind these programs. And so far, we seem to have deaf ears, because there's been no intention whatsoever to implement any of these initiatives, which is a great bone of contention. So I wonder what kind of interest you've had in your discussions so far, and certainly we'd be happy to collaborate to help in any way to see these implemented into schools and families.
We thank you very much for your positive reaction to our report and the very helpful comments you've made. I'm going to ask Annette to comment in more detail in a moment, but I just want to point out we're not in the business of lobbying for changes in policy. We give advice to government. It's up to government what they do with that advice. And although we might like to see some of these recommendations enacted, it's not really it's not really up to the ACMD to push for that. We'll make our case whenever given the opportunity.
No, I do understand that, but ACMD recommendations that were given to the Home Secretary in the past fell on deaf ears, and my daughter passed away, so I'm really not going to sit on the sidelines and see these recommendations not be implemented.
We're quite familiar with advice not being taken, so that's not going to be too much of a sadness for us.
When we were doing the report, we had quite a discussion about the balance between reducing supply and reducing demand. By reducing demand, we mean raising health awareness, education, targeted prevention, and also treatment for those that have acute problems, such as those that end up in accident emergencies, like in Paul's outfit, or for those with dependency. And we are aware that there is a relatively good evidence base for quite a lot of demand reduction activities, which is why we recommended in the report that MPS drugs should be, if you like, incorporated into existing substance misuse demand reduction activities. We are also mindful that we are in a recession, and there may be austerity measures that may affect the levels of things like drugs education in schools. So we are mindful of that, but part of the reason we made the recommendations is we are aware of the evidence for demand reduction.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for your comments, Marion, and sort of being one of the authors of the report. With the different recommendations we actually had, it was really key that we wanted to see more education for youngsters. Having 2 little girls myself, I always use my little girl test with these materials, and I think it's absolutely key that we get more at a younger age too in primary education at the end, certainly. Children are 11, they're already exposed to these issues and are making their own choices. And of course, I'm an academic, you'd always expect me to want to see more research, particularly on the societal impact of these materials and the basic chemistry and pharmacology as well. And I think there's a lot of other things we can do. The recommendations also cover possibilities of looking at these materials from the MHRA perspective. There's no doubt about this, some of these compounds are actually medicines, they're analogues of medicines. They're very closely related to existing medicines which have licenses, so certainly there's a possibility of an enforcement issue there. It would be good to see further work done from this new advertising standards agency. A lot of the claims that are made from these websites are just absolutely nonsensical. And of course other legislation like consumer protection, etc.
Yeah, it's Brian Ward, Kent Police Drugs Liaison Officer. Working in that capacity for the last 24 years, seen considerable changes in enforcement over that time. As regards adding on to what's previously been said about the testing of, or field testing of controlled substances, particularly pertaining to the novel psychoactive substances, my field testing budget has dropped from £25,000 a year to £2,000 a year over the last 2 years, and with the vast public sector cuts hitting us, I can say with some confidence I'm not in a position to field test accurately substances we are currently seizing. And also as regards Home Office approved field test methods, they are sorely limited to cocaine, heroin, amphetamine, but in terms of psychoactive substances we're not in a position to accurately field test. Likewise we can't afford to analyse those substances, so we can't intelligently enforce legislation. Will the ACMD be in a position to advise government on these kind of enforcement issues?
Well, we sympathise with the situation you outline. I'm not sure there's much we can do to help you, but what the Home Office forensic early warning system, which is relatively new machinery, it seems to be working quite well in identifying the new legal highs as they come along at music festivals and other such events. So there is some activity here, but as I said earlier, it's a very big chemical analytic problem to keep abreast of all these changes. And for you, identifying one white powder as opposed to another white powder is tough. Simon?
Yeah, I think these discussions certainly take place between ACPO and the Home Office. I think the Home Office are well aware of the changes that are taking place in police forces, and police forces are reducing their forensic expenditure, but in a number of different ways, sometimes by taking things in-house as opposed to asking forensics providers to provide it for them.
Good morning, my name is Blaine Stuffard. I'm a prevention specialist, and I'd like to return to the theme of education and prevention, which seems to have been hovering around the discussion this morning. A couple of observations and a question for Council. First observation is that, in spite of what many of us I think would like to believe, drug education is not universal in English schools at the moment. Second observation, that providing information alone is insufficient to change individuals' behaviour. I think that's a well-established piece of understanding from health promotion and health education literature. I claim those two observations as fact. My third observation, I think, is slightly more disagreed on at the moment, and that is that a distinction needs to be made, particularly in schools, between drug education and drug prevention. Education can certainly make a contribution to prevention, but it doesn't mean prevention, full stop. And my question is, there is currently a review being conducted by the Department for Education on the provision of personal, social and health education. And traditionally much drug education in schools in England has taken place under that umbrella. I'd like to invite Council to contribute to that consultation, which runs until late November, and to make two specific points. Firstly, that PSHE, three specific points. Firstly, that PSHE should include drug education. Secondly, that area of the curriculum should become part of the compulsory curriculum in all schools, including academies and free schools. That's it.
Yes, I think the question makes some very valid points. And regarding PSHE, this would seem on the face of it an ideal vehicle, an ideal framework to be able to provide some constructive education and prevention around these drugs. But I think it's important to carefully consider what the content of that education should be. I think, as we've heard from the discussions this morning, if it's just focusing on emerging new drugs, naming compounds as they come along and providing information around that, that probably is not going to be as effective as perhaps a broader strategy which helps young people respond to some of the risks that they face in society, which include drugs, as well as other types of risk behaviours, because of course risk involved in drugs doesn't occur in isolation, it occurs alongside other risk behaviours. So I would certainly agree with the questioner that PSHE is probably an ideal way forward. Regarding what prevention models we should use, I would say that's up for debate. I would argue in some respects that in fact the evidence for drug prevention and alcohol prevention is probably less firm than has been discussed already. So I think it's important to think about new ways of delivering prevention, particularly in the online electronic world, and the development of new models of prevention, such as my colleague Fabrizio is thinking about as well, also probably has a good, important role to play.
Over the last 18 months, I've been attending both the Drug Education Forum and the Drug Education Practitioners Forum, and certainly there was a sense that drugs education was going to become part of PSHE prior to the last election. I feel that we are in danger of losing some of that momentum, and I think it is something we really need to revisit, because, as has been said, children across the country are not currently getting a uniform approach to drugs education. Putting my Amy Winehouse Foundation hat on for a second, in a meeting with the Secretary of State for Health, Andrew Lansley, recently, this was a topic that we talked about, and it was certainly a topic that was high up the agenda. And the Amy Winehouse Foundation is talking about playing a role in that education, which I hope will be moved forward. And also the other thing which I've talked about with them is around the role of potentially training recovery champions to play a role in this. You know, people who've got experience of addiction, to be trained to be able to go into schools and help deliver some education around the reality of addiction. And I think that was received quite positively too.
John McCracken, Department of Health, wants to comment.
I just wanted to say that although Department of Education isn't represented around the table in terms of officials, we will be playing back to them the issues raised today, and they will be involved in the government response to the NPS report from ACMD. And just on a wider prevention point, to observe that the government relaunched the Frank service week before last, updating the materials on that and the way people can interact with Frank.
The gentleman on the front row has been waiting patiently for a long time.
Thanks. Jack Doyle from the Daily Mail. Can I just ask quickly about the Council's policy on drug users and possession offences, whether or not they should face criminal sanction, or whether or not the Council's belief that drug treatment is sufficient when someone's caught in possession, especially with Class A drugs. And then just to follow up on the questions about police and the border agency testing substances they find at the border, what